Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive into the biggest global events brought to you by Alarms.Global, your source for concise and insightful global news.
And let me tell you,
We've got a lot to
it's a world on edge right now.
unpack today. So much going on. Buckle up, listener,
Yeah.
because things are pretty intense out there.
Yeah.
But that's why we're here, right? To try and make sense of it all, starting as always with the Middle East. It never seems to be quiet over there, does it?
Never a dull moment, right? And this week is no exception. We're seeing a potential power shift of historic proportions, with Turkey cutting all diplomatic ties with Israel.
Wow, this is a really big deal, isn't it? Turkey's been a major player in the region for centuries. What's behind such a dramatic move?
Well, some analysts see this as President Erdogan's play for regional dominance, strengthening ties with countries like Saudi Arabia.
He was just there, right?
Exactly. He just wrapped up a visit. And it could also be a way to appeal to his base back home. A lot of Turkish voters are deeply critical of Israel.
So what could this all mean for the region? It's already a tinderbox.
Yeah, and this certainly doesn't help. We're seeing the situation in Lebanon and Gaza deteriorate rapidly. The death toll is climbing every day.
And the images coming out of those places are just heartbreaking, especially in Gaza. The reports of Israeli airstrikes hitting shelters that were receiving UN aid, that's just chilling.
It really underscores the human cost of this conflict and the urgent need for some kind of peaceful resolution. But with tensions this high, finding a path back to negotiations seems almost impossible. And then, of course, you have the U.S. and Iran playing this incredibly dangerous game of brinksmanship.
Right. The U.S. just conducted airstrikes on Iranian targets in Syria after those attacks on American personnel. And now they're issuing these very public warnings about severe consequences if Iran doesn't stop supplying missiles to Hamas and Hezbollah.
Yeah.
It feels like we're on the edge of something much bigger.
It's definitely a possibility, and the potential consequences are incredibly worrisome. The U.S. and Iran have been engaged in this proxy conflict for years, but it seems to be escalating to a whole new level.
So what are the real risks here? Could this actually turn into a direct conflict between the U.S. and Iran?
The risk is definitely there, and that's what makes the current situation so dangerous. Any miscalculation, any unintended escalation could have a ripple effect throughout the entire region and beyond.
This isn't just some far-off geopolitical chess match. What happens in the Middle East has global implications.
Absolutely. We're talking about a region that's vital to global energy supplies. Any instability there could send shockwaves through the world economy, not to mention the potential for increased terrorism and extremism, which never stays confined to one region.
It's a stark reminder that we're all interconnected in this globalized world, and events in one corner of the planet can have far-reaching consequences.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well,
Which is exactly why it's so important to understand these complexities and stay informed about the potential risks.
well said. Speaking of risks, let's shift gears and talk about the natural disasters that are unfolding around the world. Seemingly, with increasing frequency and intensity, it's like Mother Nature is sending us a wake-up call.
It certainly feels that way. We're seeing the devastating impact of climate change play out in real time, from torrential downpours to raging wildfires. And unfortunately, these events are hitting some countries particularly hard.
Kenya, for example, is bracing for potentially catastrophic flash floods. Their meteorological department has issued a heavy rain warning.
And this isn't an isolated incident. Italy is still reeling from severe flooding that left parts of Sicily underwater, homes and businesses destroyed. These events really underscore the urgent need to address climate change and try to mitigate its effects.
It's a sobering reminder that these aren't just abstract scientific projections. They're real-world events with very real human consequences. And those consequences are being felt most acutely in communities that often have the fewest resources to cope.
You're right. And we can't forget about the Philippines. They're facing their fourth typhoon in a single month. Just imagine the strain on those communities dealing with one devastating storm after another.
It's hard to fathom. And it really highlights the need for international cooperation and support to help these vulnerable countries build resilience and prepare for this growing threat of climate-related disasters.
Absolutely. But it's not just about responding to crises as they happen. It's about addressing the root causes of climate change and working towards a more sustainable future for everyone.
Well said.
Speaking of accountability, there's been a major development in the U.S. intelligence leak scandal. A CIA official has been arrested for leaking classified information about Israel's military plans, including potential strikes against Iran.
This is a big deal. It raises some serious questions about the security of sensitive information and the potential for these leaks to undermine national security and international relations.
The timing of this week is especially sensitive given the already heightened tensions between the U.S. and Iran. It could further complicate an already complex and dangerous situation.
Indeed. And then we have the ongoing territorial dispute between the Philippines and China, which has just flared up again with China's declaration of new maritime baselines around Scarborough Shoal.
This tiny shoal might seem insignificant at first glance, but it's become a flashpoint for tensions between these two countries.
Exactly. To understand why it's so contentious, you need to understand its strategic location. Scarborough Shoal sits right in the middle of vital shipping lanes, and it boasts rich fishing grounds.
So it's not just about rocks and reefs. It's about access to resources, control over strategic waterways, and ultimately national pride and sovereignty.
Precisely. And it's a reminder that these territorial disputes can be incredibly complex and difficult to resolve, often rooted in historical grievances and competing claims that go back centuries.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, from the Middle East to climate change to political turmoil, but we're not done yet. There's more news to unpack, including a volcanic eruption in Indonesia, a drone strike in Russia, and those incredibly concerning allegations about Iran possibly developing chemical weapons.
Stay with us as we continue our deep dive into the most important global news stories of the day. All right, so let's move on now to Indonesia, where Mount Leotobi has erupted, sending ash plumes high into the atmosphere.
Oh, wow, that brings back memories of that eruption in Iceland a while back. Remember that? It caused chaos for air travel for weeks.
Right.
Yeah. Could this eruption in Indonesia have a similar impact?
It's definitely a possibility. Volcanic ash is incredibly dangerous to aircraft engines. So airlines are already taking precautions, rewriting flights to avoid the ash cloud.
Makes sense.
And on the ground, there are evacuations underway in communities near the volcano. These eruptions can be devastating, people losing their homes, their livelihoods.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder of the forces of nature and how even with all our technology, we're still vulnerable.
For sure. And speaking of powerful forces, we have to talk about the situation between Russia and Ukraine, which seems to be getting more and more dangerous every day. There are reports of a Ukrainian drone strike hitting a Russian oil depot, setting off a massive fire.
Wow, that's a bold move by Ukraine. Attacking an oil depot like that, a key piece of infrastructure. That's sure to provoke a strong response from Russia. How significant is this incident in the context of the war?
Well, it really highlights the growing sophistication of Ukraine's drone capabilities and their willingness to strike targets deep inside Russian territory. It's a dangerous escalation that could have unpredictable consequences.
It certainly adds another layer of complexity and risk to an already volatile situation. It feels like both sides are just locked in this cycle of escalation, one action leading to another. It's hard to see a way out.
It's a very precarious situation, and the international community is watching closely, hoping to prevent a wider conflict.
Let's turn back to the Middle East, where the U.S. is stepping up its warnings to Iran about its involvement in the region. They're threatening severe repercussions if Iran doesn't stop supplying missiles to groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Is this just tough talk? Or should we be genuinely concerned about a possible direct military confrontation between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, the U.S. is definitely trying to send a strong message, but it's a risky game. Iran has shown no signs of backing down, and any attempt by the U.S. to forcibly stop those missile shipments could very easily escalate into a much wider conflict.
And to add to the complexity and danger of the situation, we now have these incredibly disturbing allegations that Iran may have developed chemical weapons and even tested them on its own people, schoolgirls specifically, during those recent protests. This is just horrifying. Is there any credible evidence to support these claims?
These allegations are being taken very seriously and are being investigated by international organizations. The reports suggest that these chemical weapons contain pharmaceutical-based agents that are designed to incapacitate or disorient victims, rather than cause lethal harm. But of course, the use of any chemical agent against civilians is a grave violation of international law and would have very serious consequences for Iran.
It's a truly horrific thought that a government would turn such weapons on its own people, especially young schoolgirls, who were simply exercising their right to protest. It's a stark reminder that even in the 21st century, the threat of chemical warfare is still very real, and the international community must remain vigilant in upholding the norms against their use.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you realize we can't afford to be complacent. Whether it's these kinds of atrocities or the threat from climate change, we have to stay informed and engaged.
I completely agree. And hold our leaders accountable for taking action to prevent these things from happening.
It can feel overwhelming at times, though, right? There's just so much going on in the world, so many crises all happening at once,
Yeah, I get that. It's easy to feel like your voice doesn't matter or that nothing you do can really make a difference. But I think it's important to remember that even amidst all this chaos and suffering, there are so many people out there working hard to make things better.
That's a good point. It's easy to lose sight of that when you're bombarded with so much bad news. Exactly. There are people on the ground, providing humanitarian aid. There are diplomats working tirelessly to resolve conflicts, scientists searching for solutions to climate change, activists raising awareness and demanding justice.
It's good to remember that. It's easy to get caught up in all the negativity and forget about the good that's being done.
And that's one of the things I really appreciate about Alarms.Global. They cut through the noise and deliver the news that matters in a way that's clear and concise. It empowers people to stay informed and engaged.
Absolutely.
Ah,
A huge thank you to Alarms.Global for sponsoring this deep dive. They're an invaluable resource for anyone who wants to stay up to date on global events, but doesn't want to get bogged down in all the sensationalism and negativity.
couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up today's episode, I just want to leave our listeners with a message of hope. The world is facing some serious challenges, that's undeniable, but we also have the collective power to address those challenges and build a more just and sustainable future.
That's a great message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today for another deep dive. It's always a pleasure to hear your insights.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. The world needs your voice and your actions.
Well said. That's all for today's deep dive into global events. Make sure to check out Alarms Global for your daily dose of news and analysis. We'll see you next time.